Welcome back to Hard Knock Life. I'm your host, Keith Chow. I got a great show lined up tonight, actually. We broke the news. Well, we didn't break the news, but we brought you the news a few weeks ago that our very own fellow nerd of color, David Walker, the BadAzz Mofo, would be taking over writing duties on the all-new Shaft comic book coming from Dynamite Entertainment in a couple months. So I was fortunate enough to get on his schedule because he's a busy man these last few weeks. But he took some time out to join me tonight to talk about Shaft and Dynamite. So without further ado, let me bring on my man, David Walker. What's up, David?
Not much. How are you? Look, I made a little, I don't know if you can see it. There you go. I couldn't figure out how to do it. I did the old-fashioned way.
We're old school on the Nerds of Color. Yeah. You're probably really busy, so thank you for being on the show tonight. And how excited are you to finally talk about this project that you've been keeping secret for months on end?
Oh, I have been keeping it a secret for over a year now, so I'm really excited. This is every day. It's ridiculous because I don't have kids, so I don't want to be one of those people who talks about their kid all the time, and I'm talking about a comic book series. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but every day I just sort of wake up and go, oh, wait a minute. I'm working on Shaft. It's that sort of. It's very much a dream come true.
Well, let's rewind a little bit. You are a long time member of the comic book industry. You've been writing for a while now, and you do film and you write and you draw and you do a lot of things. But one of the things that you do is blog, and thankfully you blog with us. We share content across sites at thebadazzmofo.com as well as Nerds of Color. And one of the things that you've been championing is the comic creators of color, specifically Black creators, and more diverse characters in comics. It's something that you've written about on your own site and you've written about for us. How do you feel to be kind of in the forefront of that, creating one of the most iconic Black characters in fiction?
Well, since you put it that way, it's I want to say, on one hand, it's really intimidating to sort of think about it, but then on the other hand, self-deprecation aside, this is something that I've been meant to do for a long time. I feel like I was born to do it, so I don't feel. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, but I'm trying not to think about it in terms of, oh, like this comic could be a game changer, Hopefully it will be, and hopefully people will enjoy it, and it'll sell well, and people will bow down at my feet and worship me. But I just want to write the best comic I possibly can, and Dynamite has been really supportive in what I'm doing, and they've been really good to work with.
Well, I want to talk about how that came about. Dynamite had announced a while back that they had gotten the license to do a Shaft comic book, and they only just announced that you were writing it. Like you said, you had these plans in the works for a long time now. How did they come to you with the idea to write Shaft? And what was your first what was your first reaction when you heard that they were making a Shaft comic book, and second when they offered you the gig?
All right, so this story hasn't come out yet too much, so you might be getting the exclusive.
Nice.
I'd had the idea. I can't tell you how long I had the idea of doing a Shaft comic, but it's been years. Really since I was a kid, and I just sort of kept putting it off as being a possibility for a very long time, and then about 3 years ago, I really started thinking about it. Seriously, what's the possibility? What would it take to do this? And the first was, well, you got to find out who has the license and then figure out how to procure that license. And so I did some investigating, and Ernest Tidyman, who's the creator of Shaft, he wrote the original novels. He's no longer alive, but his widow is still alive. So I got her email address, and I reached out to her with the idea of doing Shaft as a series of comics, adapting. Initially, the idea was to adapt the original novels.
Okay.
And she was totally on board with that. So she got me in touch with the agency that reps the estate, and they were like, "Hey, this is a great idea. No one has really come to us with this idea yet." And so Then I said, okay, well, if I find a publisher, let's see if we can make this happen. So I was really investigating the comics world, who I thought would be the best to try to get the license and then to let me write it. And it was a really short list, to be honest with you. Dynamite was at the top of the list. They were the first publisher I went to. And I said, hey, I want to do Shaft, and I know the people who have the license, and they're cool with me doing it. Wow. So what do you say? And so then began the long process of negotiation. And I don't know anything about actually licensing properties,
right.
the legalities of it, the finances of it. So I sort of left that to Dynamite, and that process started, I want to say it started around August of last year, and then they announced the book in May of this year. So it was that long before all the details were worked out. And it wasn't until May that we knew for sure the book was going to happen.
Right.
And the whole time I was just sort of like, please, it's my life has been a series of my autobiography up until now could have been called A Day Late and a Dollar Short. So I feel like this was a really good. It all came together in just the right timing.
Well, that's really interesting. So it was actually the other way around. It wasn't that like Dynamite got the license. Hey, look, we got this great book. We want you to write it. You did all the pounding the pavement to get the book to them.
I pounded the pavement. To their credit, they did the real heavy lifting. I mean, in terms of the negotiation and all that sort of stuff and writing the checks, they did all of that.
So you brought the idea.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was that when I approached them, they had already discussed in-house about doing a Shaft comic, and what they didn't realize was that I don't want to totally misquote the information, but my understanding is that they had gone to Paramount to talk to Paramount about the rights, and Paramount didn't have the print license. They only had film and television, and so that was sort of they asked and no one had gotten back to them, and they had other stuff that they needed to do. So and I was the one who was like, I'm pretty sure Paramount wouldn't have the print rights to the book. That's or to the character. Just it seldom works that way. So that was where I figured start with the family, and that's what I did.
No, that's actually really fascinating. One of the things though that I guess why I didn't even think about that is like Dynamite almost seems like the perfect publisher to do a Shaft comic. For those of you who may not be aware, Dynamite Entertainment, they kind of, I mean, it's not the only thing that they do, but they kind of specialize in like licensed comic book properties, licensed properties, turning them into comic books. One of the, they've done, they've done like the Shadow and Phantom.
Yeah, they've done
those
Lone Ranger.
Those kinds of like classic iconic characters, and they package them into comic book form. So just the idea of Shaft, why no one's ever done a Shaft comic book is kind of like mind-boggling when you think about it. Like it's so perfect for the comics medium. And two, that if you're going to do a Shaft comic, if you're going to adapt such a classic story, Dynamite seems to be the perfect place. So that's
they really did. And I have to emphasize this enough. This isn't me like kissing up to the publisher or anything like that. It was a very short list. Dynamite was the only one on the list, and in part because of their history of licensing other characters, other intellectual properties, but also that I knew that Shaft needed. It couldn't be like a PG book. It couldn't be, it had to be at least PG-13 or R, and they do some really great stuff. And so that was it. And it, again, like I said, at this point, it's been a great relationship. I think what happens with a lot of creators is they look at characters that they'd like to play with. They don't necessarily know who owns the rights, and nobody's sort of investigating, or the opportunity doesn't come up. Chris Robertson, who wrote Doc Savage over at Dynamite, had always wanted to write Doc Savage, but he never had the opportunity to write it when it was over at DC because they never approached him. And then when DC let that license lapse, he had just mentioned in passing, hey, if you ever do Doc Savage, he mentioned it to Dynamite, if you guys ever decide to license that character, let me know. I'd love to write it. And then, like a year or two went by, and so it's sort of like that. It's like there's a similarity in there, and that is like, I just want to be really proactive. because my
Right.
career was in the toilet. You know, I needed to
I
find
wouldn't say
something.
that.
Well, aspects of it were the
Mm,
sort of the comics writing aspect of it just wasn't going where I wanted it to go, and
right.
I knew that I was ready to tackle something big, but there wasn't anything big presenting itself. And comics are actually really hard. They're a hard medium to create. It's easier
Right.
if all you do is write, then comics are really difficult, because if you now
Right.
write and draw, it's great. But it's easier to make a movie than it is to make a comic, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know that you know, someone who's, I mean, and I would not even go as far as to say that I've written comics, but I, as someone whose only talent, if to call it that, is writing and not drawing, I totally feel what you mean, because you know, you can't go to you can't go to a convention with like notebooks full of script ideas.
No,
But if
no,
you
you
have
can't.
if you have a portfolio, I mean, there's always the off chance that someone sees it and goes, "Oh wow," right? Like you don't see too many writers in Artist Alley saying, "I'll do a character sketch of you," I'll commission a character sketch of you if I'll write a little like poem about, you know, tone poem about you or something like that. So that makes a lot of sense. As just someone who's kind of experienced how hard it is to break. And the other thing about comics, and as someone, you know, your comics work has been in more of the independent, like before Dynamite, you've done some work for Dark Horse, you did some work for Monkey Brain Comics.
Yeah.
It's much harder, especially to break into the more top tier premier publisher.
Yeah.
Because it's almost, I mean, I wouldn't say it's an old boys network, but it's kind of an old boys network. Like,
No, it's not even kind of. It is. It's
yeah.
an old boys network, you know. The fact of the matter is there's a couple creators out there that I know, creators of color, to tie into the subject of the blog and the
Mhm.
podcasts and all that stuff, who really should be working at Marvel or DC. I'm not even including myself in that category, but for whatever reason they're not getting the work, and they, you know, whether it's not they're not getting invited to pitch ideas, or if they're pitching ideas and they're falling on deaf ears.
Right.
But there's a couple. I'm not gonna say there's a ton, but I can easily think of 4 or 5 writers right now. There's no reason they shouldn't be at Marvel or DC. None, absolutely at all. And the fact that they're not there says that the editorial staff or the, you know, whatever, the recruiting staff isn't looking hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is that I actually got invited to pitch some stuff to DC over the summer, and then they quickly rescinded that invitation. So,
So you did not even get to do the pitch, or?
I didn't even get to do the pitch. No, I signed the non-disclosure agreement. I'm sort of on their email list now. So they never even told me specifically what the project was.
Right.
And so, like, I know that I'm on the radar. I know that I'm on both of those radars. And I think what people are, you know, waiting to see, what a lot of people don't understand, especially fans don't understand about the comic industry, is that, like, Marvel and DC are like the major leagues of comics. And in order to make a major league team, you at least got to play college ball or a minor league or something like that.
Right.
You get invited up to the big leagues, and the way you get invited up is you build a name for yourself in the minor leagues, and you know, hopefully, knock on wood, Shaft will sell really well. Then it's more realistic that I'll get that phone call from Marvel or DC that will say, like, hey, do you want to write Black Lightning? You know, because that's as creative as they are. So.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, I wanted to get to this eventually, but since we're on the topic of the big two, one of the most recent BadAzz Mofo posts that you put up was about, you know, you were comparing John Shaft and Sam Wilson, and you had mentioned in the blog post that you had this great idea for a Falcon story. And I'm not going to ask you to share that idea because you know, that's something you want to keep in your back pocket. But just, can you talk a little bit about where the idea for that particular post came from, and why you specifically kind of, I mean, we kind of know why he's in the ether right now, he's in the zeitgeist, but why specifically did you use Sam Wilson as the counterfactual for John Shaft?
You know, it's interesting because I'm not trying to knock what Marvel's doing with Sam Wilson right now, but for those of you that don't know, he's taken over as Captain America. So he's given up being Falcon. Now he's Captain America, or Captain Falcon, or whatever they're going to call him, And aside from the fact that it's a storyline that's been done in the past, there's been other times where Sam Wilson has taken up that mantle. It's here's a character who's 40-something years old and has yet to have a defining storyline, right? He has yet to have a defining moment in the Marvel Universe. I mean, at least Black Goliath is known for being killed at the outbreak of Civil War, right? Falcon doesn't even have that. And so to me, as a person of color, it was especially insulting that anyone at Marvel could think that the greatest achievement that a black character could have is to fill the shoes of a white character. Right. Is to assume that to put on that costume. And I had this idea when they announced that Sam Wilson was going to be in the Captain America Winter Soldier movie. I was like, I asked some people I knew at Marvel, well, what's Marvel's plans for Sam Wilson? Are they doing anything with Falcon, because that character is about to blow up? Yeah. And this was right around the time I was doing the stuff with Shaft, and these friends of mine at Marvel were like, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing going on with Sam Wilson. They haven't thought about it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to put together some pitches. And I actually put together a pitch for an Ultimate Falcon story, and then I put together a pitch for the 616 version of Falcon. And then there was a pitch that would sort of turn the 616 Falcon into Ultimate Falcon. I was covering all of my bases, really. Right. And
well, that's smart too, because the movie Falcon, the movie version, the Anthony Mackie version of Falcon, is much more closer to the Ultimate version anyway. So if anything, that would have been the one that might have gotten some shine, as it were, after the movie kind of took off.
And that's what I was doing. I was trying to the real story I wanted to do was the one that could sort of transition the old school Falcon into this newer character, right, and redefine him. And so I put it all together. I spent time working on it. Meanwhile, I was sort of waiting for the Dynamite deal to close and putting together some other proposals. And then at one point, I really had put this pitch together. It was looking pretty solid. And I was talking to some people I knew at Marvel, and they were like, forget it. It's off the table. And I was like, why? And they were like, well, okay, on the down low, this is what's going to happen. And so I knew, when they announced that Sam Wilson was going to be Falcon, a month or so ago, and this, I won't out who told me, but I knew this back in, I think, November or December of last year.
Oh, you knew he was taking over Captain America.
Yeah. And so I just kind of threw my hands up in the air and was like, whatever, I mean, here's the reality, is that Steve Rogers will come back as Captain America in less than a year's time, right? And at that point, Shaft will still be going strong, and Shaft will be Shaft, and even though the character was created by a white guy, that character stands on his own. He stands in his own shoes. He's not anybody's sidekick. And he exists in a world where he sets the rules and the tone for how he moves through that world. Right. And part of the reason I want to do a Shaft comic, especially within the last several years as I was developing as a writer, was that when I looked at the sort of stories I wanted to tell, in comics, there were no black characters that I could tell those stories with. Like, I couldn't do... Even if Marvel called me tomorrow and said, "Hey, could you write a Luke Cage comic?" which I could, I wouldn't be able to tell the sort of Luke Cage stories I really would want to tell. And then I realized, well, if I create an original black character, then you got to go through the whole hassle of trying to get the name recognition for the character and sell it. Yeah. And so it was like the answer kept coming back to Shaft, like what it was like. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? Who do you want to? What toys do you want to play with? Right. And it just kept coming back to Shaft for several years. And finally, I was like, okay, I have these stories that I want to tell that are set in, a more urban environment that deal with some of the issues that aren't necessarily unique to the black experience in America, but are definitely unique to the urban, inner city, and poor experience in America, and I knew I wasn't going to get to do that. You know, I wasn't going to get to do that with the toys that Marvel owns or the toys that DC owns, and it just kept coming back to Shaft, and so that's why I went after it.
Well, I want to circle back to something that you just said though about one of the kind of counter arguments that a lot of fans of color at least get whenever you see an African American or a non-white character or non-white actor, let's say, get cast in a role that's traditionally white. I know that's something that's been very heated, especially even on the Nerds of Color, when Michael B. Jordan was cast as Human Torch.
Yeah.
You wrote a lot for us about that. Well, one of the arguments against cross-racial casting non-white actors in white roles is that, and it's actually an argument that a lot of times white fans throw at you, is that, well, why don't you just create, instead of bastardizing our characters or bastardizing the canon, why don't you create your own characters of color, make movies out of them? And, you know, that's great. And, you know, God bless like Dwayne McDuffie, Michael Davis, Dennis Cowan, and the Milestone guys for doing it. We tried doing it with Secret Identities to much lesser success. But one of the things about creating all new characters is something that you touched on, is that it takes a while for those characters to catch on. You have to build the brand recognition, the name recognition of those characters if you're creating them whole cloth, and which is great, and which you know, if you can do it, it's awesome. Like I said, Milestone kind of paved the way in that. But by the same token, you know, if I want to see a black superhero movie or an Asian American superhero movie, I'm not going to be able to see the Secret Identities movie for if ever, like at least 20-30 years. I don't have that much time to wait. So that's kind of the argument for why it's okay in my view. It's in the theme song for Hard Knock Life. With when they said Donald Glover for Spider-Man, we don't mind, because the whole point is to have, you know, these characters that were created many years ago, when people didn't, first of all, they were all created by white people who didn't think about creating non-white characters. That's, I think, what separates Ernest Heidemann from, like, you know, Bob Kane or whatever, right? Thank God, like, a character like Shaft exists, and you can do that. And it's one of the reasons why I was so fond of Gene Yang's work on the Green Turtle, with the Shadow Hero book that just came out, because it was basically saying, you know what, this was an Asian American superhero that existed 50-60 years ago, and we're just bringing him back. Same thing what you're doing with Shaft. This is a black character that's real and lived in, and I can do these things with that character. But what is your opinion of that argument? And you kind of touched on it, that, you know, why don't you just create a brand new character and make movies and TV shows or whatever out of that?
Well, you know, there's a reason why we see them turning old television shows into movies and bringing them back. You know, there's a reason why they made an A.T. movie. There's a reason why there's been 4 Transformer movies. You know, it's about name recognition. It's all about branding, right? We live in a society where the market is driven by branding. And if you have a name that's recognizable, it's like, I mean, there's stuff that, like, I can't believe they've made. I can't believe they made a Dukes of Hazzard movie, right? And then not only did they make it, they actually made a sequel. Not a lot of people know they made it was like a direct-to-video sequel. Like who was clamoring for that? But clearly there was enough, right? And so, you know, my feeling is like, I could have just as the story that I'm telling with Shaft, I could just as easily have done with an original character. But that name Shaft has a recognition to it, you know, that's really worth a lot of money. You know, it's like if I were to do, I could create an original costume vigilante whose parents were murdered, and he runs around the streets fighting crime. I could write the greatest version of that ever told, but if that character if it's not told in the form of a Batman story, not as many people are going to see it. And so one of the things that I find really interesting that I've been looking at is sort of applying that model and sort of looking at, like, okay, so what are characters of color? You know, and Dynamite, to their credit, did it with the Green Hornet series. They really took Kato and turned Kato into this far more complex character than he was, 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
Same with Tonto in the Lone Ranger series.
Right.
And so I've been looking at some characters like that, and I keep telling some of my ideas to people, and they look at me like, I've been smoking crack or something like that. But I really, there's a couple doozies that I'm getting ready to like bust out and see if I can. I'm trying to find out who has the license to some characters that will, like, in the past would be considered horrifically offensive.
Right.
And it's like, okay, let's turn it around, because the thing is like, again, selling something original seems so difficult to people, and sometimes the audience just sort of boggles my mind. It's like the fan base, they don't want to try anything new, but they'll, there's people who are actually debating about whether or not Thor is going to remain a woman.
Right.
There's no way Thor is going to remain a woman. It's a gimmick.
Well, Avengers 3 comes out in May, so you probably have that
exactly.
timeline.
That's it. It's less than 7 months for them to turn that around. Now, at some point, if the female Thor remains popular enough, like the way Beta Ray Bill did, then she may stick around. But it's always a gimmick, and when these big corporate entities, and we can never forget that Marvel and DC are subsidiaries of huge corporate entities, all we are to them is our consumers. And as long as we put our money into, I went and saw Guardians of the Galaxy. I enjoyed it. And I'd love to see a Black Panther movie, but that doesn't mean they're going to give me a Black Panther movie. And so we have to, as consumers, have to think about what we want to support and what we want to demand. And it's like, if when they were talking about Donald Glover as Spider-Man, right, and everybody went nuts.
Right.
If it had been the exact opposite reaction, if none of the racist idiots had chimed in, if none of that had happened, if suddenly everybody in America wanted Donald Glover as Spider-Man, it would have happened. And then they would have found a way to make Peter Parker. They would have retroactively, and it wouldn't have been Miles Morales. It would have been
It would have been Peter.
It would have been Peter. And so there's nothing that these entities can't do. They just don't care to do it because, again, it's an old boys network, and because the loudest, most vocal fans are, and I'm not saying this in a disparaging sort of way, but the loudest, most vocal fans are white guys, right? And
there's definitely there's definitely the stereotype fanboy audience, and it's not just that they're white straight male. 18 to 49 demographic. That's what
they all talk like this. They all talk just like the comic book guy from The Simpsons. But here's the interesting dynamic, right? The New York Comic Con is coming up. I'll be going to that. I go to San Diego Con pretty much every year, and more and more you see that my understanding is that women were 47% of the attendees at San Diego Comic-Con this year. 47%. And then if you throw in people of color and women, and then you begin to throw in people who identify, whether it's somewhere within the LGBTQ spectrum isn't the right word, but you know what I mean.
No, I know.
When you throw in all of that, right? When you throw in the non-straight, non-male, non-white, the others, which is what I am and which is what you are, which is what, when you throw them in, they outweigh. They're more than 50%. They're easily into the 60, maybe 70 percentile total combined, and yet the product that we consume is not reflective of that. There's not nearly enough, and we'll just keep it to comics, right? We won't limit it. We'll limit it to comics as opposed to opening up to film and video games and anime and all that other stuff, right?
Well, you don't even have to limit it, because one of the things I was going to bring up is the whole Gamergate controversy and the way women are treated specifically in that whole kind of like, you know, weird community where like you have, and I feel like it's the same idea, that you have a very, very small minority of people who are very vocal on the internet, who feel threatened by seeing, you know, when they go, like you said, when they walk the floor of Hall H or the exhibit hall and they see brown and yellow people and women and gay people, and they don't know how to react to that because they were very insulated in their cocoon of their echo chamber of, like, you know, internet message board white dudes.
Yeah, because they're not living in the real world anyway. They're living in their D&D world. They're rolling their 30-sided die, you know, and yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But,
no, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
But I mean, it's very much like I feel, and I think I've used this analogy before, but I feel like a lot of times, and like you said, we'll just keep it to the comic book, the fanboy, fan geek community, is very much like Fox News, right? Where you have like a very vocal small group of people who are very set in their ways, but who are very loud about it, who demand, you know, gratification. And that's why the publishers, the big two publishers, the majority of the big two publishers, because like there are some books here and there that kind of reach across the aisle, but for the most part they kind of cater to this, like they cater to the base, right? But the base is shrinking. The base is going to die off soon. Where the young people are, where the people of color are, where the females are completely in a different space, but they're not catering to them because they feel like they can't lose the base. And it's very much like how the Republican Party treats like the Tea Party and the racist white people. We're just going to keep feeding them the stuff that they want, even though it's just this echo chamber. This is not the real world. We're going to shield them from what the real world looks like because they're scared of it. And we're going to make our money that way. That's how I see it.
And the sad part is when when folks of color buy into this concept. You know, there's people who are they're adamant about that. That Spider-Man absolutely has to be a white guy. I've had this argument with black folks and Asian folks or whatever, and to me, like, that's sort of a crying shame. And yet some of these same people will bemoan the lack of diversity within the comic industry, to which I'm always bringing up, well, then, okay, then you got to look outside the big two. You know, and I know for a fact, you know, that Concrete Park #2 came out. Tony and Erica's comic, which I think is great. And it's like, you know, and I don't know what their sales are like on that book, but it's like, there's not nearly enough people talking about Concrete Park #2 as they're talking about whatever the hell Marvel or DC just put out yesterday. There's not enough people talking about Gene's new book that you just mentioned, and the name is completely
the Shadow Hero.
Yeah. Which, you know, I mean, his earlier work is just amazing. Yeah. And again, there's a guy, and with him, he doesn't need to go to Marvel or DC.
No.
You know, he's doing stuff for First Seconds, and you know, his stuff's going into libraries and schools, and he's doing stuff on a level that you know, he's exploring, taking comics to a level that that the big two aren't even interested in taking it into. I mean,
his comics are literature. You know,
they are.
They're getting book awards and
everything. The that dual set that came out, the Boxers and Saints. It's absolutely brilliant, you know. And when I read that, I read the Boxers first, and I was kind of like, yeah, I don't really want it. The Saints one, not calling out to me. It seems like it's like, and I thought I knew what that story was going to be.
Right.
But I liked Boxers so much that I read the other one, and both of them were just like brilliant. I mean, I think that, like, again, they transcend comics, and I hope that at some point, like, the dialogue of great graphic novels will include his work.
Right.
And it's not like 20 years from now. They should be included now. I mean, we're still talking about Watchmen and Mouse like they're the most trend-setting books of all time, and I'm like, you know what?
Have you read American
Like,
Born Chinese?
yeah, American Born Chinese. Let's put that up there because these other books are like 30, 20 something, 30 something years old. Forget it. Forget about it.
The big two, and then the second tier would probably be like, the Dark Horse and the Image books, where you do see more diversity, because a lot of those are creator owned, and I think that's the line of demarcation, right? Because you mentioned, Warner Brothers is DC Comics, Disney is Marvel Comics, but then Image, yes, there are big corporate entities that kind of get their claws into the Image titles, like The Walking Dead, but who's getting all that? Robert Kirkman. That's all his.
He's
what
laughing
I mean?
all the way to the
exactly.
bank.
So you have like creator owned stuff at Dark Horse and Image that gets blown up, but that's because they feel like independent books, because they're not backed by, where you have these guidelines and rules that you have to follow. You can't do this, you can't do that. You can do whatever you want in those books. And then you have the tier below that, which are all the rest of the indie publishers and people who self-publish and people who publish on the web. Mari Naomi, who was a guest that we had in Hard Knock Life a few weeks ago, put out this database of cartoonists of color. If you haven't checked it out, you need to go check it out. It's essentially just a straight up spreadsheet, but he's trying to list as many creators of color as possible, just to show the world, like, what, we're out there. And it's not just like the same three guys. It's like there's a whole world of creators out there who like you said, who aren't getting the opportunity at the big two, but you should go out and find them and buy their work and support them, and find them on Twitter and find them on Tumblr and support their work, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny, when I was a kid growing up reading comics, I didn't know this, but like a lot of my favorite comic artists were all cats from the Philippines.
Right.
It was like there's Tony DeZuniga. I figured that was an Italian name, but no, he was from the Philippines, But these were all guys that were like, I worshipped at their feet, and I didn't know, I didn't necessarily know. With a guy like Ernie Chan, you kind of guessed, okay, he wasn't a white guy, but it was interesting, and that's the and there's some great artists especially artists in the industry, that are folks of color. Sanford Green is amazing.
Right.
Mishindu Kumba. There's some folks out there, and you don't necessarily know. I mean, Dexter Vine's one of the best inkers in the business.
Right.
And he's a brother, and so that's the thing. It's like there are people in the industry, but they're not the faces of the industry. And the faces of the industry, with the exception of 2 or 3 women who are incredibly talented, but they're almost like the token women that they roll out and go, look, we've got women working for us, And it's like, and again, without naming names, I mean, one of those women is like, I consider to be one of the best writers in the industry, period. You don't have to put that qualifier
female writer.
You don't say, yeah, she's the best female writer, and I can say that's Kelly Sue DeConnick, because I've said it before, time and time again. Jen Van Meter, another amazing writer, who it's not to take away from their and they're both feminists, and they're both but they're human beings too, and they're great writers. And that's the thing, whenever somebody says to me, oh, well, that's a great white or a great black writer, or a great woman writer, or a great Asian writer, and it's like, okay, well, first of all, like, come on, like, either you're a great writer or you're not.
And one of the things, I mean, that was one of the impetus behind Secret Identities, is that, like, we noticed, like, wow, when you look at who are all the top creators in comics right now, it's like Jim Lee, Bernard Chang, Greg Pak, they're all Asian. Why are there no Asian characters in the comics? It's like, you have all these guys who are Asian American. Why don't we specifically wanted Asian American characters. That's the whole other kind of like layer of issues when it comes to the way Asians are depicted in comics, is that most of the time when they're depicted, they're going to be like, not American, first of all, and most of the times it's going to be like some, silent ninja or martial artist or mad genius Ra's al Ghul kind, Fu Manchu type character. So we wanted to have like Asian American characters who were just as iconic and heroic as everybody else. But I'm starting to go on a tangent by Secret Identities, but we're not here for that. We're here to talk about Shaft. And one of the things, to bring it back to what we kind of went on this tangent about, like, just the state of the industry, but one of the beautiful things about what this book will do, hopefully, and I don't know yet because it doesn't come out until December, but I fully trust that you will bring this, is that it'll bring these authentic stories of African American characters to the pages of the comic book. And I think that's something that, Dynamite and Shaft are bigger than like the web comics and these independent comics that we're talking about, and they're great, but I feel like there's something to be said about having, like we were talking about branding earlier, and having that kind of brand name behind it that gets the attention beyond just like comic nerds like me and you. Like when a Shaft book comes out, you're going to hear about that beyond just the comic book world, because Shaft is such, Samuel L. Jackson made a Shaft movie a couple years ago. It wasn't a good one.
No, it was terrible.
But you know what I mean? Like Shaft is not like a no-name character. Shaft is a brand name. It has, it elicits like Richard Roundtree and Isaac Hayes, but it also elicits these novels that you're basing your work more on than the 70s films. So let's talk about that. How are you going to take this character, and I'm assuming it's still going to be a period piece.
Yeah, it's a period piece. The story arc that I'm working on right now takes place in the first issue takes place in December 1968, and then the rest of the subsequent issues take place in '69, around March or April of 1969, and it's this first story arc is really about how Shaft actually becomes a detective. He sort of stumbles into it, and in the books, the films never really get into this. In the books, he was a veteran of the war in Vietnam, and he had a juvenile criminal record, and so those are two things that are playing really heavily into it, and trying to get some relevance as I talk about issues that veterans are dealing with, and the issues of what happens when we send young men, 17, 18 years old, off to war, and then also trying to steep a lot of it in the history of New York. Like just today, in fact, I was writing a scene where Shaft is walking down 125th Street in Harlem, and I was like, okay, the Apollo Theater, we'll put the Apollo Theater behind him, and I was like, well, there's the main marquee, but then there's the other sign that says the Apollo. When did that go in? And I was like trying to figure out, was it in 1969 or not? And for me, it's just been this incredible learning curve, and because I love history, but so I've been really delving into the history of organized crime in New York, and if Dynamite keeps me around long enough, I'd like to carry Shaft through the 70s and into the 80s, and begin to look at things like the crack epidemic that just ravaged inner city Black America, and the sort of benign neglect that started in the 70s, carried into the 80s, which was through the birth of hip hop. Like I'm actually thinking, how can I incorporate the birth of hip hop, Africa Bambaataa and the formation of the Zulu Nation? How can I work that into a Shaft comic? See,
you should have brought that up. Now Shaft has to be this 25 issue, because right now I'm not sure how many issues it is, but now that you're saying you want to tackle the birth of hip hop, if Dynamite doesn't have this book go on for like 10 years, I'm gonna be pissed off.
Well, I know, hey, it'll all be based on sales, so go to dynamite.com and pre-order, or go to your local comic retailer, pre-order right now.
That's right. In fact, it's currently in the October previews. So those. Yeah,
it's in the October previews, and it's the day of the internet now. Seriously, if you go to dynamite.com, you can order it there.
Right.
And it'll be available on Comixology. It'll be available through the Dark Horse digital store. This is where we get into sort of the shameless self-promotion.
Hey, that's why we're here.
My contract with Dynamite right now is for a single story arc. It's 6 issues, and I've let them know, and it's an original story. We haven't even really begun to get into, are we going to adapt any of the novels or not yet? Although I actually had, when this whole thing had started, I actually adapted the first novel into comic format, so it's ready to go. If they decide they want to do it, it would just be some tweaking and polishing.
How many novels? There's like, what, 7 novels?
There's seven novels total, yeah. And I know for a fact that in terms of comics, I have 5 story arcs that I definitely have mapped out that I would like to do. So that puts us somewhere in the 20 to 30 issue area, you know. If they want to keep me around that long, I'm cool.
You got it all worked out.
They're also planning on doing some prose stuff, some original prose, and so I really would.
And I
like
read in the press release, aren't they trying to republish the original novels too?
Yeah, they're going to republish the original 7 novels, which will, you know, that in and of itself will be interesting because they're very pulp and they're very product of the times.
Yeah.
And so political correctness does not play in at all. You know, but I enjoy the books, and I've let Dynamite know, and we're talking about doing me doing at least one of the, you know, and they'll be more like novellas, you know, 50, 60,000 words. I have one clear idea for sure that I want to do, and then a second one that's on the back burner. But the other thing too is there's a lot of other writers that want to do Shaft stories, and I don't want to hold that monopoly on that character. I do want to see him treated with, you know, with respect and done right. But I've already talked to a couple other writers that have come to me and said, oh, we want to do something, and I'm like, great, I'll introduce you to the folks at Dynamite. Let's try to make this happen. Because this, and I've told them this, and I don't even know if they quite get it. I was like, you know, this is a really unique, you're in a unique position. You're doing something with one of the most iconic black characters in popular culture. You've got a person of color writing the book, and you actually have a person of color drawing the book, too.
And I want to talk about her.
And she's a woman, you know, so... And they when I tell them that, they were kind of like, hey, okay, yeah, we're just trying to put out the best book possible. And I'm like, man, you guys got to capitalize this. This is like you are doing more than Marvel or DC combined with one book, right? And you know, so.
Well, and you mentioned about treating the character with respect, and never mind the Dennis Cowan Bill Sienkiewicz cover that totally blew my mind, and I went framed on my wall. But can you talk about the actual interior artist? And I want to make sure I get her name right. It's Bilkis. How do you say her name?
I have no idea how to pronounce her name, which I think is a good sign. Yeah. Because the comics world is full of creators you don't know how to pronounce their names.
That's right.
I believe it's Bilkis, but it who knows? Yeah. You know, I just know she's amazing. Yeah. She did Doc Savage at Dynamite. She's done a couple other things. When I knew that they were considering her for the book, I talked to Chris, who'd written Doc Savage and worked with her, and asked, you know, how was she to work with, and he was like, he had so many positive things to say about her. I kind of thought, like, okay, yeah, he's just blowing smoke right now, you know. And then I started seeing the pages come in, and I was like, okay, like either he downplayed her abilities, or she's upping it to a new level. And I really can't emphasize this enough. We've never met, we've never talked. We're friends on Facebook, but I don't even know if she reads English. She's Brazilian, so I'm assuming. I'm assuming English isn't her second language. It's, you know, probably Portuguese, Spanish, and then English if she knows any English. But like, she gets it.
I wanna get her name right, just because we've been talking her up, and sight unseen, I haven't seen any pages from the book. David has, of course, but I haven't. But I'm going to put it out there that I think she's going to blow up after Shaft #1 comes out in December. Her name is Bilkis Evely, I think.
I believe that's how you say it too. And I said this too. There's like 3 or 4 people that I've shared her work with that are really good friends of mine in the comic industry, who are well established, way more established than I am, and they all work at Marvel, or have worked at Marvel, and they all were like, "Who is this?" And I was like, "This is my artist." And actually, one of them was like, "I want her for something," and I was like, "Well, maybe after we're done." But yeah, no, she's amazing. I feel really fortunate to work with her, and I think that, you know, there's going to be a time when I'm probably knocking on her door.
Yeah.
And, hey, do you think I can write for you? Because
she
needs. And I'll say this too. I believe that her, you know, she's going to blow up after this. I really hope she, because I'm a strong proponent for creator-owned stuff. I hope she can latch on to a really good creator-owned project, because I think that she's pretty young. I don't know how. I think she's still in her 20s, which makes me like totally
that's
want
crazy.
to just vomit, you know. But she's cool. She's an amazing artist. You know, if you check out her stuff in Doc Savage, you're going to see something that you think looks good until you see what she's doing in Shaft, and then you're like, wow, this is pretty amazing.
So Shaft #1 drops. Do you have the date? December
3rd. It's 2 days after my birthday.
All right, what a birthday present.
And what's interesting is that the story takes place on December 2nd, which was something of an Easter egg, that my dad was born on December 2nd. And so I was like, I knew I wanted the story set in late 1968, and so I set it on his birthday, and at the time not knowing when the book was going to come out. And so it's kind of funny, because it's like, well, you know, it'll come out on December 3rd, and the whole story is contained within one day. That first issue. So I don't know. I in my own nerdy, dorky way, I find that to be endlessly amusing. No one else will find it amusing but me. But
well, now we all will. Everyone who's watching tonight will.
And when they buy the book, it's a belated birthday present to me. They don't have to buy me a present. Just buy the book, and I'll be happy. So.
There you go. So if you want to celebrate David's birthday, check out, go to your local comic shop, go to Comixology, and make sure you buy Shaft #1, and continue buying Shaft #2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, so that we can get Shaft #35. So I want to thank David Walker for taking the time out to talk with us tonight. You can find him on Twitter at DavidWalker1201. Let's see the old school name tag. There you go. I think you're cutting it off. You might have to. There you go. David Walker1201 on Twitter. Also check out BadAzzMofo.com. Check him out on the Nerds of Color. And again, look for Shaft #1 in December. And thank you for watching Hard Knock Life. I'll see you next time.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share the interest together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NO.